Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me. My name is Dr. Sandra Pavelka. I'm here in Fort Myers, Florida at Florida Gulf Coast University, where I'm a professor and founding director of the Institute for Youth and Justice Studies. I'm also president and CEO of Community and Restorative Justice Associates. Thank you so much for joining me today. I will be presenting on restorative justice law and policy and an analysis of statutory and legislation and policy. So if at any time, you need to share any comments, please feel free to email me. And I look forward to hearing from you. If there's anything I can help you with in your locale or in your state or at the national level in any here in the United States or in your country, please let me know. I am happy to work with you and look forward to it. So without further ado, I want to share this PowerPoint with you, and we will begin the PowerPoint and the presentation. So again, this presentation is on the restorative justice in the United States and analysis of statutory legislation and policy. I might backtrack a little bit right now. I had previously been with the Balanced and Restorative Justice Project back in the 1990s and early 2000s, where I served as project administrator of the Bowers Project, which was funded through the U.S. Department of Justice. We received a grant several years where we were working with local governments, state governments, and assisting them in what they saw as promising practices in restorative justice. And many of those individuals felt not only that we wanted to have these changes at the local level, but it was even more important to have those changes in law and policy at the state level. And so I began to work with them in changing their policies and legislation at the state level. We also knew that in our Balanced and Restorative Justice Project that we had been working really with every state in the country at some level. As part of my work with the Bowers Project and a very important actually anniversary, I'm coming up to my 20th year receiving my PhD, I needed to come up with a dissertation topic. So this was all part of my dissertation, to actually do the assessment and to interview key decision makers in all the states across the country. I was lucky enough to have all those individuals. I had 100% turnout for that. That was very impressive, and I had really important data that I was then able to transfer to my dissertation, and has really been my research ever since. So I'm very proud of that, and I'm even more proud of our work as restorative justice practitioners, academics, and advocates, that we have continued on this journey into 2020 and beyond. So I wanted to give you a little bit about that background, because that was really seminal research in the field back then. And again, I have continued to do that research and to update it since. So as we see here on this slide, legislators and justice systems administrators have reformed their juvenile justice agenda from punitive actions, because they basically saw that punitive actions were not working, to a means that provides responses to crime and wrongful occurrences by developing and implementing restorative legislation and policies. There have been a number of policy endorsements and advancements for restorative justice with the American Bar Association, the National Association of Community and Restorative Justice, of which I am actually chair of their law and policy work group, as well as being on their advisory council, the National Council of Crime and Delinquency, the National Council of Juvenile Family Court Judges, the National Association of Victims Assistance, the Office for Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention under the U.S. Department of Justice, as well as the United Nations. The methodology to my assessment included several things. It included really delineating an analytic procedures specific to this approach and specific to what I wanted to accomplish with this research. I also utilized a summative content analysis of state statutes and codes. I really wanted to get a very comprehensive look at what was happening, what was actually in the statutes and codes within our states. And I also analyzed qualitative data in order to allow myself to include large amounts of textual information and to systematically identify any properties. In addition, I identified categorically key words and phrases that could further my research and content in statute and codes. And then further, I utilized LexisNexis data analytic for legal research searches. That was a very important piece of my research. So here's what the national assessment actually looks like. Back in 2000, when I originally did this, 1999 to 2000, originally did this research, we saw that 3 states had what was termed balanced approach, and I'll get into more specifics in a minute. 10 barge, 6 restorative justice, for a total of 19. And here now, fast forward into the year 2020, we see that we've doubled that doubled this language in state statutes and codes. 7 now in balanced approach language, 20 balanced and restorative justice language, and 11 with restorative language. Again, for 38 total, which is very, very impressive. So talking about some of the balanced approach language that I just discussed, Illinois has a really wonderful example in terms of their Juvenile Court Act, which provides that the juvenile justice system will protect the community, impose accountability for violations of the law, and equip juvenile offenders with competence to live responsibly. So including the 3 goals of the balanced approach, and that includes community safety, accountability, and competency development. Very key in the balanced approach. Kansas statute maintains that the primary goals of the juvenile justice codes are to promote public safety, hold juveniles accountable for the behavior, and improve their ability to live more productively and responsibly in their community. Now, if we look at these 2 states, and I specifically talk about Colorado because Colorado has really been looked at as a model restorative justice state. And especially in the United States, Colorado has restorative justice in their statute. They have backed it up with funding. They have specific practices that are being implemented across the state. And they also have a real premier legislator in Senator Pete Lee, who has really championed restorative justice in the state of Colorado. So if we look at Colorado's statute, we talk about its declaration, legislative declaration, to protect, restore, and improve public safety, provide the opportunity to bring together affected victims, the community, and juvenile offenders for restorative purposes. Further, while holding paramount the public safety, the juvenile justice system shall take into consideration the best interests of the juvenile, the victims, and the community in providing appropriate treatment to reduce the rate of recidivism in the juvenile justice system, and to assist the juvenile in becoming a productive member of society. These are wonderful, wonderful words that I think can really serve as a model piece of legislation for those of you who may be looking to develop and implement such language in your statute and code. So I really can't emphasize that enough. California's code includes compelling restorative justice language that seeks to protect society from the consequences of criminal activity. And to that purpose, community restoration, victim restoration, and offender training and treatment shall be substitute for punitive punishment. It also includes some other language that certainly can serve as some model language for you. Now, if we look at balanced and restorative justice, this includes both the balanced approach goals and restorative justice principles in statute. And Oregon is one that I'd like to kind of talk about a little bit because it was the home of my very dear friend and colleague, Dennis Maloney. Dennis passed away in 2007, and he really assisted the state of Oregon to implement balanced and restorative justice, and also worked with their legislature to include this chapter in their code. And the Oregon law seeks to protect the public and reduce juvenile delinquency, to provide the system is founded on the principles of personal responsibility, account, and reformation in the context of public safety and restitution to the victims and the community. Pennsylvania, another real barge-centric state, who we did a lot of work with during the Balance and Restorative Justice Project dates. In fact, we helped them model this language. They also have the key points of the balanced approach and restorative justice in their statute. So that includes the protection of the public interest to provide for children committing delinquent acts, programs of supervision, care, and rehabilitation that provides balanced attention to the protection of the community, the imposition of accountability for offenses committed, and the development of competencies to enable children to become responsible and productive members of society. It's absolutely beautiful language in their law. Now, this is a map that really details all the states. It provides a map key here that really includes all the states that are part of this research, and it also includes the most recent reference of my article in Justice Policy Journal in 2016. That is available on the web. It's also part of the platform, so you can upload it and read it for yourself. So in terms of my research as well, I wanted to look at the specific restorative practices that were in statute and codes. And there are 20 states that specifically address restorative practices in statutes and codes. Victim offender mediation in Minnesota, family decision-making meetings in Oregon, reparative boards in Vermont, community reparative boards in Maine, neighborhood accountability boards in Florida, community juvenile accountability programs in Washington State, and reentry courts in Washington State. And again, these are specific in statute and code. There are a number of, obviously, states that are implementing practices in their states, but they may not have the state specific in code. So I wanted to address this in this presentation and in my research. And then there are a number of states that have specific responses and positive interventions to school discipline in their statute and code as well. There are even more states that have that are implementing restorative practices in schools. So again, these are the 6 states that that actually have it in code, and then I've listed a number of states that are actually implementing restorative practices in their local school districts through various initiatives that are revising their code of conduct to include restorative responses, training, technical assistance for administrators, faculty, staff, and students. And certainly with COVID, we see that these practices are probably more important now than ever. LA, Oakland, through our joy as well, out in Oakland, San Diego, San Francisco, you can see there are a number of local jurisdictions and school districts that are implementing restorative practices in schools in California. Denver, Colorado, another piece of that Colorado model. Lee County, Florida, my home county here in Fort Myers. Charlotte County, Florida, and Chicago, Illinois. Those are just a few. And then I wanted to also talk about the restorative justice model that I mentioned as Colorado as a state, and really specify each here. And that includes, of course, its code of the code within the Colorado revised statute, and in their Victims' Rights Act that specifically discusses victim offender conferences attended voluntarily by the victim advocate, the offender, and community members and supporters as well. Colorado also has local restorative justice coordinating councils that actually include restorative practices in their plans. And there's a $10 court fee that is applied to juvenile and adult cases when they're in court. And that money actually goes to fund the Restorative Justice Coordinating Council. Wonderful model and opportunity here in Colorado, and then for other states and locales across the country. In addition, there are core key strategies with the Division of Youth Corrections. They actually provide the right services at the right time, deliver services by quality staff, utilize established restorative practices, deliver services in a safe surrounding, and embrace restorative principles. In addition, the use of restorative practices is extensive in the state of Colorado, not only in the justice system, but also in their schools. They have restorative chats, restorative circles, conferences, and victim offender dialogue as well. And then there's also the Longmont Initiative, which has really been around for about 2 decades now. They're self-funding. They're a regional restorative justice project, and they use both adult and youth facilitators under the auspices of the Longmont Community Justice Partnership. So some really great examples of what is actually under the Colorado state model. And then this I included because this is the most recent state statute that we see in Massachusetts. And I included the language here so you would see a really wonderful language that can be adapted to your state. And it includes community-based restorative justice programs, both for juvenile and adult. And that restorative justice may also be applied, and this is interesting, in a final case disposition with judicial approval. Not all states have that. And so this I thought was really interesting and would be of interest to you. This isn't the model PowerPoint slide, but this is a really good example of Illinois where there's an executive order back in 2019 by the governor to actually create the Justice, Equity, and Opportunity Initiative. And within this initiative, it's very far-reaching. It includes economic, jobs, et cetera. But it also includes juvenile diversion, and it includes restorative justice within this executive order signed by the governor of the state of Illinois. And this is just the second part of that. So I wanted to also talk about some pending legislation that we have seen across the country. In Oregon, there's additional legislation for law enforcement discipline and accountability, and to also include restorative justice and restorative justice arbitrators. In New Jersey, they have a bill that would place restorative justice in education, and one that would include restorative processes with regard to marijuana legislation and marijuana expungement as well. And then U.S. Congress actually has two pieces of legislation that are ongoing in H.R. 40, which is establishing a commission to study and develop reparation proposals for African American Act, and then also restorative justice reparations for slavery and other racial harms that have been caused. And then there's HR 1111, which would establish a U.S. Department of Peace Building. Very timely pieces of legislation. This is an example of the New Jersey Act with regard to education. This is an example of the Department of Peace Building Act that was part of HR 1111 in 2019 and is ongoing as a proposal in Congress. So now I'd like to talk about some future implications. One is leadership. Leadership is critical. If I mentioned the state of Colorado and now Senator Lee. He was a state senator and he ran for state senate and is now a state senator. He provides continuing leadership with regard to restorative justice and juvenile justice in the state of Colorado, and has been real critical, not only in the state, but also nationally. Advocacy is key. So to continue to advocate for restorative practices, not only policy and legislation, but in schools, in the community, in the criminal justice system, in the juvenile justice system, and to really reinforce the importance of that vision, to have a vision, to look at your community, look at your region, look at your state, look at our national government and say, what should it look like? What is our vision? Include community members, include legislators, include justice system partners, and really work on that vision and work with each other to establish obviously a key restorative justice vision. And of course, legislation and policy, something that is near and dear to my heart. Legislation and policy, establishing it, it's wonderful to have it in practice and to be actually implementing it in practice, but to further legitimize restorative justice is to place it in legislation and policy. So important. And as we saw back a few slides ago, there are 38 states in the United States that have actually legitimized restorative justice and placed it in their legislation, in their law, statute, code, and policy. Funding is also important. Obviously, it's good to include funding for additional positions. Usually once restorative justice starts being implemented, it gains strength, and thus the importance of funding and state and staff, etc. So funding is important. We go back to the slide about Colorado and thinking about Colorado actually including that $10 court fee to fund restorative justice in the state. Performance outcomes and evaluation, so important. My colleague Doug Thomas and I wrote an article a couple of years ago on incorporating performance outcomes in the juvenile justice system, and it's on reference here in this PowerPoint. So performance outcomes, evaluation throughout the process, so important, and tying it all into your work and keeping it at key points within the process as well. And degree of restorativeness and fidelity. And I can't emphasize this enough. So many people now who say they're implementing restorative justice aren't including the victim, they're not including the community. So in a sense, they're not really restorative practice. So to be sensitive to the degree of restorativeness of your practice, of your policy, of your legislation, and to really have the greatest degree of fidelity as possible. I might add too at this point that in the research that I conducted, that all of the states and statutes that were listed, it's based on the wording within the statute and the wording within the code. it's the degree to which it's actually implicitly or explicitly mentioned within statute and implemented within the state was not examined. So that would take probably more resources than I have. I would love to do such an analysis. Hopefully, I will do that soon and in the future. But that did want to mention in terms of the research. So that is looked at to me as something that I can certainly conduct in the future. And these are those references I mentioned, select publications. It includes a reference to the Justice Policy Journal article that is included in this PowerPoint and this research. Also includes the evolution of balanced and restorative justice that my colleague Doug Thomas and I were asked to write for the Juvenile Family Court Judges Journal last year. And it includes our performance measurement article that was in Perspective several years ago, as well as one of my original pieces in the International Journal of Restorative Justice on policy and legislation, as well as a very well-referenced article in the Prevention Researcher on practices and policies for implementing restorative justice in schools. So those are some publications. I will actually include a couple of those publications on this platform. Again, thank you so much for listening to me and being a restorative advocate and really being part of our global effort to see restorative justice move forward across our world and ultimately to make our world a better place. We definitely need restorative justice more now than ever. Thank you so much.